Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video MtoA 526 I'll be talking some more about the GPU, and as you might have had some time to test it, you can see it's pretty nice, it's very solid and it's very nice to work with, especially interactively. Right now a brand new Maya scene. I will be kind of recreating a previous tutorial because I got lots of requests on how to do a eye shader, so I'll be using the digital Emily asset one more time just to visualize or display how I create an eye shader, a physical almost correct eye shader, and I'll be showing you how to do that with the GPU instead, and I'll be trying to show it off in the viewport render instead of this the separate window from the Arnold render view. Let me quickly show you the Arnold render version I'm using. It's MtoA 3.20, which is the new one which supports the GPU. So be sure to have at least that version to follow along. And so let me just bring in the asset. It's Alembic cache import, and I'll be just loading that in. I'll just do it off screen for a second, my computer, and I'll just browse to that location quickly. And then we can get going. Let me just drop that into my presets here on the left. So now I have my eye shader, I have my Maya resources, and then there's the Emily 2.1 Alembic scene, and I'll just display you a link where you can actually download this to follow along. So just head over to this link, gl.ict.usc.edu, and research digital Emily. You can just Google for digital Emily and you will be redirected to this link. It's a research project, so you get pretty nice scans and you also get the provided maps. So what I did, I downloaded the Alembic file and I downloaded the textures, which are here, Emily maps. So I download these two things and we will get all these maps, and I will be showing you how to set up a photorealistic eye shader. So before we jump into this shading tutorial, obviously I'll need to plug my latest tutorial, my course, which I have published on Udemy. It is a Katana master course which shows you the ins and outs, how to set up proper look depth and lighting templates, and just to get more familiar with that whole Katana software package. I'm teaching you based on my experience I gained working in the industry for quite a while now, so it is very versatile. It gets very advanced fairly quickly, but these are like the standards you have to adopt to actually land a job, especially for bigger companies who use Katana in the VFX industry. Right now, Udemy offers this as for 204 Canadian dollars. Udemy has their own sets of promotions, so right now that's what it costs. I have a YouTube offer link for you guys, which will be 63% off, which will be totaling to $74. This is the coupon code is YouTube65 off, and I will also be sharing you this link in the description below, so be sure to check this out, and I would really appreciate your support by buying this course, not getting it illegally. I know there are always ways to get stuff illegally. I spend lots of time creating this content and I hope you will find it useful, and if you do so, I would really appreciate if you spend that money for it. Alright, that's enough of promotion, so let's jump into this tutorial. I hit Ctrl S to save my scene, and I am already in the correct folder. I just need to go up one directory to Maya, and I just create a new folder called scenes, and I'll just store this or save this as MtoA 526.mb, like that. Alright, scene is saved. So first thing I like to do is just bring in a light. I always like to start from scratch just that everyone can follow along. Right, so clicking on the color swatch, bring in a file node, loading in an HDRI, which is here, and I'll do that quickly off screen just to load in the right maps. This is a basic studio environment which looks like that. Two lights from the front and then basic lighting, nothing, it's very soft, which is great. So what I then tend to do, I go to my render settings, I load in my preset, my good preset. Oh, not deleted it. Import render settings, good. It's just a few settings, nothing too crazy. My default Arnold render settings, which I like to use, ray depth of 2, and then basic settings. It's just easier for me to just get going very quickly. This time though, we will switch the render device to the GPU, which is, keep in mind, in beta, so it's not yet a production renderer, just because there are still some minor things to address, but all in all, it is usable. It is great to use for sure. Anyway, so that is loaded, and what I like to do then, I select all my geometries like that, right click, assign new material. If you don't have the favorites, I have them. I can just show you assign new material, and you can just right click, go to the Arnold thing. Let's say you want the standard surface shader. You can right click this and add to favorites, and it shows up in your favorites section up here, and then you can just do favorite standard surface. So all of these have now the standard surface shader applied. I will just call this AI base shader like so, and I will just hide the head for now, and I will hide all these guys. So this tutorial is an eye tutorial. I will not really go into detail about skin creation. We might touch it up a bit, but this is just about how to get the eye shader working. So I have two geometries coming in from the Alembic file. I've got an outer and an inner like that. I actually just want to make sure I freeze all my transformation. They come in transformed, so I just want to select all of these, go to modify, freeze transformation, so everything is on 0. So whenever I move, I can just 0 things out and they will be where they were. Alright, so opening up the hypershade, this guy here, I just clear everything, and I will be just going into that folder where I have downloaded the textures to. Alright, so in Emily 2.1 texture folders, I just go into color raw, and then I have my iris inner, my color inner, and my bump, and my outer two colors. So I'm just dragging them into the hypershade. The benefit of doing that is it creates the file names correctly, so I have them in here, and just make sure that you also convert your textures to TXR files if you have not done that already. TX Manager, select the ones which are not tagged with a TX and just hit create TX here, and it will create those TX files. It's just better for Arnold to just start the render. So what I want to do now, I just select the outer shape and I right click it and assign a new favorite material, AI standard surface shader, like so. And this will be my outer, like, or cornea, I think it's called cornea, which is the outside. Not sure why I got that error at the bottom there, but that should be fine. Alright, so what I want to do then, I don't care about the inner stuff just for now, but the outer I care about. So we've got a bump and an outer color map. So the first thing what I want to do is connect the color to my base color, make sure my base is set to 1, and then I want to create a bump node, which is an AI bump 2D, which is Arnold's bump node, not Maya's bump node. I select the red channel just because I want a grayscale value, and a bump map is a grayscale texture, so it does not matter if you pick RG or B. I'll always tend to just, out of habit, select red. Out value goes into my bump normal camera slot, and this is now the setup for the shader. So if I hit save and let's try to render in here, I just go to render Arnold, and then I have my floating window. I hit play, which should load the GPU right now. And you can see we got that render going. I can move in the viewport, and you can see the GPU updates fairly instant, and we get clean renders very fast. You can see the bump map is working as expected. So how this eye shader works, or how the human eye kind of physically works, is you have your fleshy cornea outside here, which is solid, and then that cornea part, or that eye white part, it fades into a kind of an optical see-through glass thingy. It's not glass obviously, but it's like a see-through layer, and we want to mimic that as well, because this is how it works. And this is how you get the nice refraction going on, and sometimes even caustic effects. So before, in previous tutorials, I was using a Maya ramp. Arnold now ships with an AI ramp, and they have a float one too, which is perfect. So I'm just creating that, and the out value, which is a float, I want to connect that into transmission because we want to have the top of the cornea to be transparent. So let's just plug that into transmission, and you can see things are disappearing, which is correct because the map is white. So if I go to my debug shading menu, I just tear that guy off and make sure I have isolate selected on. This is now how my ramp looks, and at the back you can see it's turning like a dark gray. So what I can do now, I can just move that bottom left slider in my ramp and just move it all the way to the right to actually fade off or create a ramp from back to front, right? So I can also hit that little arrow thing to tear that off to have a bit more control and flexibility. So if I move this further to the front, you can see it's hitting that tip of the cornea, and whatever is white will be glass, and that is correct, exactly what I want to do. The only thing what I want to do now is have the front be white, 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 and then just like a little smaller transition there. So I'll just move this guy back to get a softer transition here. Something like that. I can move this back a bit further, something like that. So let's just leave it at that. And if I disable my eyesight selected by clicking the disable thing on the top, you can see now that we actually are seeing through the front part and seeing the inner geometries. Yeah, so this is kind of cool, right? So what I want to do next is just play around with those values and see what we can do to make it even work a bit better. So I just want to unhide the head to see how much we reveal from the iris. So I just hit Shift H, I think, to unhide. And you can see if I zoom back a bit, I switch my show to selection highlighting off so I don't select or see the selection. And you can actually see that she has a pretty large iris. Now I think it's a bit too much. We can check the reference actually just to see how it is for her exactly. So I just open the website again. So you can see that the iris is kind of touching the top of her eyelids and the bottom. And let's see if we have that. I think ours is a bit too large. So we just scale this down a bit, and we scale it by just adjusting the ramp, obviously. So right now the ramp is kind of a bit too far to the left. I just need to move everything a bit more to the right. So let's move this guy over and the bottom one as well. All right, so now we have something going on here, which is fairly close to the reference. So I think we are good for now, or that's good enough for now. All right, so if I close the ramp now, we can see that we see the bottom part of the behind part. Obviously our roughness is too rough and we are distorting it quite a bit. So in my cornea shader, what I want to do is drive the roughness based on that ramp as well. So right now it's a black and white ramp, the front is white. So what I want to do, I want to change the roughness, which is then controlled by that ramp. So if I visualize that map again and by isolate selected, this is now my ramp. Let's for now just hide the head again just to get a bit faster stuff going on. So I want whatever is white, I just want to control that. So I can do a color correct node, AI color correct. Let's see if this will actually work. Yeah, it will work. So if my mask is my color, which is white, and I just plug this into my, let's just out alpha. I'm not sure how this will work. I can convert that, but we can just connect this to the specular roughness and see if we can do isolate. We can. So I just hook up the out color to my ID slots just to visualize what we actually are doing here. All right, so this is now my base roughness, and values are good between 0.05 to maybe 0.2. So let's just do maybe a value of 0.1, or maybe let's just do 0.2. And then for the cornea, which is now in my mask, if I just do add to 1, we should get white in the front. So this is now kind of the opposite. So we want this to be fully black. So what we can do, we can just multiply this with 0. And now whatever is in the front here will not get any roughness, which is perfect. We can obviously just add slightly a roughness, but if it's blurry, like if the human lens in the front would be blurry or like specular rough, we would see blurry images. So it should not be actually blurry at all unless you have dirt on your lens. So if I disable isolate selected, you should now see a very clean reflection in the front here. And I hope that is the case. You can see all the rest is pretty shiny now. And let's see how this works here. I think this is working pretty well, unless the front is still very rough. So I will be just adjusting the inner shader for now, the eye inner, just to make sure that we don't get misled by the other shaders in the scene. So I'm just creating a new surface shader right now. And this will be the inner. So I'm selecting the inner geometry here and there, assign that. And then I'll just, for now, just make them black and no speck. Just for us to actually see if we get some clean reflections going on here. And I think it looks fairly clean. So a good test is to just disable the, disconnect the roughness and just change the roughness to higher and lower values. So this would be a value of 0, and this is perfectly clean, so we don't get any reflections. The only thing we have on the lens now is the bump. So if I go to my bump and just disable that, we should get a super crisp reflection. So all we got to do now is just use that same map and just change the height using the same kind of technique we did before. Hope that makes sense. So color correct is driving our roughness. If we just reconnect this, red channel goes to specular roughness, like that. And then we just want to change the value for the map as well. The same idea. So we can just copy this color correct node. Oops. I think it's... we can just hit Ctrl D to duplicate this. So I just would connect the same out value to my mask. And this time my base color, it would be 0.01. 0.01, which is the same value as my bump height. And then because the mask is driving this, which is a black and white map, what I can do now is just make this 0 as we did before. So now the bump map should be off on the lens in the front. And you can see that is what's happening. And you can see that we still get the bump here on these sections here. Let me just get a nice frame. And you can still see the detail going there, going around like the veins and all that. We can push it a bit further if we need to. So this is currently 0.01. We can do maybe 0.02 to get a stronger bump map on the sides here. And then when we go to the front, it's super crisp and clean. So that is essentially the idea which we want to do. All right. Okay. So this is all, this would be kind of the setup for the outer part. And let's now just work on the inner. So if I just open this guy up, hitting 4, it opens up the nodes. I can just connect the out color to my base color and make sure my base weight is on 1. And now you can see that we get some color back, which is perfect. Right now we don't have any specks. The iris is very, very rough. It's very fibery. It does not have actually any specks, or they are very soft, just because the surface is kind of like a cloth fiber. There's like lots of great close-up images of an iris. It's super dense and displaced, I would say. So we can add a little bit, but we should not have too much on it. So I'm just connecting the bump map as well to my normal camera for the iris. And if I hide my outer geometry, we should just get the iris here. And if I bring back the specular, you should see that this is now our shiny iris, which is obviously not correct. We can push the bump a bit further, maybe 5, like that. And then I just want to have this strong depth in it. We can actually use it as displacement as well if we need to, but I think this should just be fine. And now we just need to work on the roughness. As I said, it actually does not have spec, so we can just push down the IOR bit and increase the roughness maybe to 0.6. So it's almost off, but there's a slight speckiness to it. All right, and then unhide the outer part again. And this would be now what we have for the eye shader. We can just have a look how it looks with the head in place. Unhide the head, zoom out a bit, wait for it to be resolved. Yeah, and I think this works pretty well. So we can see the iris is right there. I can actually boost my render settings. Right now they are stopped at 4. So for the GPU, you can just go up to 20. It will just resolve and resolve and resolve. I like to change my field of view actually. It's 35 lens now, so we can go maybe up to 85 just to get a more profile lens. Let's just unhide the other eye, which does not have any shaders right now. So outer gets the cornea shader. Interesting. Why did it do both already? Inner gets the standard surface shader. Interesting. Yeah, so this was kind of just touching up how to create those little eye shaders. And you can see if I look at this from the side, we get the correct refraction going on. And let me just introduce a really straightforward skin shader. AI iris like that. And this is still my base shader. Oh, we still have the flicker transparent, which is the thin water layer, which we can also assign a surface shader to. The geometry comes with that asset. So now we have the little layer, a water layer here. And the cool thing is you can actually apply a little bump map to it just to break up the spec a bit. Flicker. This is black. Yes, and we want no roughness, and we want this to be transmissive like that. So this is now our little water pass, and what we can do then is just apply a little noise, AI noise. This goes into a bump 2D, AI bump 2D, and I'm just hooking up the red channel to the bump map, out value to normal camera, and I just want to do a quick region select, and I want to make sure that I have my debug shading menu open, isolate selected open, and I want to select the noise pattern, and I just want to change the scale maybe to 10, something like that, just a bit of breakup. We can add some detail to it, maybe like that, and just have a look at the normals. This looks better, and just disable this. So now you can see there's some breakup going on in the plica or the thin water layer, which is great. This might be too strong, so we can just dial down the height by 0.1. Softer is just a bit like a little fall off there. And what is new to Arnold is that the opaque is set automatically at render times. So if it's off or on, it does not really matter because it happens at render times. It checks if the shader has transmission. If it has transmission, the opaque slider will be toggled accordingly. So that is a very nice new feature of Arnold, so we don't really need to take care of that. Let's bring back the lashes. It's a bit more geometry to load in, but they are there. Let's just do a region here, and let's just assign a shader for those guys as well. And let's do an AI hair. I think it's called standard hair shader. There we go. Select the, which one is it? Select the lashes, assign that shader. There we go. Now we can just, I think the default one is a black shade or like a dark hair shader. And if we check the reference, this is actually the render. It's not the proper reference, I think. It's hard to see, but she has brown hair, so it's kind of like I would guess it's a brown kind of look, a brown kind of shader. So we can have a melanin of maybe 0.7, which 0.2 would be kind of blonde hair. You can see it gets really bright, but 0.7 is kind of a brownish. 1 is black, 0.5 is kind of like in between, and I think around 2 is kind of getting blonde or white. So let's just leave it at that, not too much to fumble with, and let's just import those skin shaders and just play around with that a little bit, and as well with the displacement map. Alright, I just dragged in those maps, and let's just go to Arnold menu, go to Utilities, TX Manager, and make sure we create TX files, which is a mipmap format for Arnold, and we're just mipmapping them right now. While it's converting, I just changed the color space for my input images because they came in as PNG. I had to change them actually to sRGB. So now you can see we got a nice color on the eye. It's not that red and glowy. And I changed the same for the cornea. So in the color, I just changed this to sRGB. Depends what if you use OCIO, you would need it's called utility linear, or you can just change this to sRGB. Alright, so textures are converted. We've got all the ones in TX base. So now let's just try to see what we can do. Saving and maybe just disable this. Okay, and disable that. Stop the render. And now what we want to do is just create a new shader. Surface shader like that. Select the head and assign this shader, and this will be my AI skin shader. And if I now change the color, you can see that everything works very nice. So we can also actually play around with this texturing mode and make this one, make sure lighting is on, and we can accept the roughness, the transparency. We can see already a nice texture going on here. So if I just connect my color to my base color, maybe we can actually see the skin. There we go. And this is now in EXR format, so my color space should be correct. I hope we can see how it will look. And then depending on my displacement maps, how good they are, I don't need to play around with roughness because it's driven by the surface texture anyways. So just in the skin, just have a look at the IOR. We have a skin preset. It depends how oily it is, but I like to keep it a bit less than 0.4, maybe 0.38 or something like that. That's just my personal preference. And so what we can do now is just create a displacement shader like that, hook up our luminance, which is in my case just red. You can choose green or blue because it's a grayscale map. It does not matter. And I'm hooking up the displacement shader, which we just created, into the displacement shader slot here. So hooking these guys up, we should get these connected. This is also in ACES space, which is correct as well. So let's just hit save. And I think we can just hit render and see what we actually get. And hit play here. Okay, this is right now what we get. Obviously, it looks very freaky, so we need to see what is going on. The displacement map is a zero-based map. We don't want auto bump for now. It will just break it. So make sure the scalar for this map, the scalar zero value is 0 because it's a ZBrush map. It goes from negative to positive values, and the center 0 point is obviously 0 in this case. If I view my debug shading again and I visualize the wireframe, I guess it's not supported actually, but you can see it's very low res. So what we can do is just increasing our subdivisions on the head geometry under the Arnold tab, subdivision, make sure edge type is to Cat Clark, and then we can specify the iterations, and also we can specify edge length. So if you have a really high edge length, let's say 50, you should not see any difference by increasing the iterations, because this adaptive error is defining how much the mesh should be subdivided. So you can increase your iterations maybe up to 4, and then just really slowly bring down this number, and you can see the lower I bring it down, the more subdivisions I get. So maybe try 20 here, and now you can see we get more and more detail. We can try to actually see if there's a wireframe shader, AI wireframe instead. Let's see if this one works. If I go to isolate, or let's just hook this guy up here as my surface shader and do this, I would have expected to see the, oh, it's not supported. Okay, wireframes are just not supported right now. Okay, not too bad. Let's go back to the basic, and we can actually just reduce this a bit more. Maybe let's go 10. And we should get even finer subdivisions. And then obviously this is way too strong, so we can just dial down the scale, maybe to 0.1, to get really soft surface irregularities like that. And maybe 0.15. Just some slight details here. You can see it works pretty well. We can just try maybe going a bit lower on the subdiv, so maybe try 5, see if we get more detail here. Takes a while to subdivide, and you can see now on 5 it's subdivided by quite a bit. Right now it's only in this area because that's where the subdivision happened, but we can just force recompute it by changing the value slightly, which should now recompute the displacement, and now we should get this fine detail everywhere. And let's just do a, maybe go back down to 5. So it should subdivide one more time. There we go. So now we have this nice detailed skin. And if I go back to my skin shader, you can see now we get this breakup everywhere, which is nice, but it's not perfect. She looks now very sweaty, and I think my color space is not correct on her. She looks very saturated, so we can try to change the color mode to, we can try the sRGB one as well. Let's have a look if this looks better. Definitely does not look better, so we can actually just go back to the raw, or we can go back to the ACES CG, which is kind of a raw in this kind of sense. So this is now what we have, and now let's just try to introduce that micro displacement which we have here. Oh, I can actually see we used the micro displacement all along. We did not actually use the displacement, so that was a rookie mistake on my end. So let's just first, so if this is the micro displacement map, this should actually be driven, okay, I see. This should kind of be only a bump map. So let's just hook up the correct displacement map first and see what we get. And go back to the basic mode like this. So now we can actually push our scale again. There we go. So yeah, I was just I was using the micro displacement as my displacement. So obviously now we get the little bumps and all that, the lips and the detail on the lips and all that. So this is great. So we can actually, if I enable auto bump now, let's see what we get. We get even more detail, and this is actually perfect. I was just sorry for that, but this is actually the better way to do it. And what we can do now is, having this micro displacement, we can just do a mix. We can actually, is there not a lerp, like a math node, AI math or something? Lerp? There was a way to just mix two things together. Let me just find that quickly. So I can just use a little add mode, and then before I do that, I just use maybe a color correct just to reduce the intensity by quite a bit, because the micro displacement should be played in only very subtle. So my color 2 goes in here, my top color goes in input 1, and then the color correct for my micro displacement, I'll just multiply everything by a very low value. So let's just dial it in maybe by 10%, or maybe 0.05, which is 5%, will be added of the micro displacement. So I'm grabbing this texture, I'm multiplying it by a value of 0.05, and then I'm adding this on top of my original displacement map. So let's see what that brings us. So you can see now we get these little wrinkles here, which is very perfect. And this is coming in from the micro displacement, like the little detail on the bridge of the nose, like all these little lines and all that, like these things here. This is coming in from the micro displacement map. And as you can see, with that much detail, if I switch back to my disable, like to my original texture, you can almost see that we almost don't need any roughness anymore, because everything is just broken up by the skin itself, just because we have that much detail in it. But we can for sure just bring in some slight roughness to all of this. Maybe just go up to 0.45, so we don't need a really map. So this is now pretty dry skin. You can see we don't have any shininess to that whole face. So obviously that would be too much, maybe 0.3. We can see we can get some slight specularity back. And right now we are not using any scatterings. This is totally just the diffuse component. So we can rotate the light by 45 degrees just to get a bit of a sidelit image, which works very well. And you can see the eyes are working very nicely. And what we can do now is obviously use the GPU for the scattering as well. So I'll be just hooking that up quickly. I've got my base color, and this is not a skin shading tutorial in any way. I'm just quickly plugging things in, and in my subsurface scattering slot, I'm just enabling this full on, and I'm changing the mode to random walk. V2 is not really supported yet, and I just want to change my scale to maybe 0.1. And I'm just selecting a little region here to render, just to get a bit faster iterations. And then I'm just plugging in the base color to the scatter color, like that. And then just to be lazy, I can just select a kind of a skin tone here. We can actually select a preset for skin, which should change. Okay, let's just break this first and select the skin preset, which sets our depth values. And then I'm just reconnecting the diffuse color to the scatter color. Now you can see we get the nice color bleed in the nose. Obviously it's way, way, way too much. So let's just change the radius. I think it's, well, let's just reduce this. Just reduce the scale by another factor of 10, so 0.01. So now we can see we get really slightly some scattering going on in the nose area, and I think this is good enough. We don't want to push this too much. Let's just see if we move this over a bit, if we still get the nice detail. Obviously it takes a lot longer now to render. So this is now where the GPU comes to its end kind of thing. It takes a long while to iterate. So what you can do now instead is just use the CPU. So this would kind of be the idea. So if I just stop the render right now, close this guy up, maybe bring it back in just to disable. That's like a little bug, I guess, that we still have that frustum there. So just disable that and go to my render settings. Change the mode to be on CPU right now. Oh, interesting. CPU, and reduce my camera A, go back on these guys. So this is my typical setup for CPU rendering, and hit render. Let's see what we get. Alright, and as you can see, my bucket's finishing up. This is now the rendered CPU version, and I have 6221 render settings. I think the eyes look very convincing, and that was the main idea of this, just to show you how to set up the eye shader. And I just went a bit further to show you the skin shader option with the micro displacement, blending, and all that. And obviously, there still needs to be a lot of done in terms of the skin shading, just to play a bit with the roughness, make the lips more shiny, and all that. But in general, I think this worked pretty well, and this is a very nice result already just by this quick tutorial setup. And yeah, as I said, I went a bit further showing you how to set up the skin. I can show you let's just store this quickly. I can show you the bump maps on the basic mode here. Let's see if that actually, yeah, there we go. They are rendering as well because I have progressive refinement off. You can see the final step. There you go. And you can see the nice detail we get from those maps and the displacement in general. But anyway, so thank you guys for tuning in, and be sure to check out the Katana course, which I have uploaded on Udemy. So it would be really appreciated if you can have a look. So you can find it on udemy.com/katana-masterclass, and this is the course I have been working on Udemy for a while. I would highly appreciate your support on that platform, just because I spent so much time developing these, and yeah, it's just fun, and it's really motivating me to create more content if I can get a nice turnaround and I can see that you guys enjoy it. So thank you guys again for tuning in this tutorial on eye shading and a bit of skin shading, or let's say setups for skin shader. And I hope you enjoy this, and I will see you in my next tutorial soon. Thank you guys.